I'm very excited to welcome Mark Richardson here today. Speaker, author, ran a giant remodeling company in the US for 20 years, 40 years, many years.
30 years.
30 years. 30 years. So, incredible experience here. Mark spends a lot of time these days advising other remodeling firms on how to better run and grow their businesses. So we're really excited to have you here and to share your wisdom with so many more people out there today. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Liza.
You're very welcome. So let's start with just your perspective on why tech has become a priority for, building and remodeling businesses these days. What's changed in the last few years? What are you seeing when you, meet with businesses and help businesses these days?
So when you kind of turn the clock back and you take a look at the industry in terms of how it's evolved over the last, say, 30, 40 years, we go all the way back into the 70s, and most people aren't even old enough to remember what it was like in the 70s. But that was a time that was kind of a Tin Man era. And once we got into 1980, there was a television show that came out. And this little television show made homeowners aware that remodeling is an option. It's not just about replacing your siding, but actually doing remodeling. Anybody remember what that television show was? This Old House. As we moved through, you had a lot of changes that were happening. You had Home Depot and Lowe's kind of come into effect. You had the house and the house and garden channels come into effect. But all of a sudden, there was kind of a heightened awareness about remodeling became greater and greater. The reason I go all the way back is that the same, I think, dynamic happens with technology. 20 years ago, we used to talk about, somewhere in the future, technology is going to revolutionize this industry. And today, we don't talk about that anymore because it has revolutionized it. And I think homeowners today don't look at technology as an option. They look at it as an expectation. And I think those remodelers that are embracing it as an integral part of their language and their mindset are the ones that are being the most successful.
Makes sense. And actually, I'm going to share with folks here some of the research that we did recently. When we hear about the demands that builders and remodelers are facing today, everything from supply chain issues, right, to weather and pandemic and the economy and tariffs, right? There's so many things that we're hearing that, they find it harder and harder to manage client demands and client expectations. And so we do a lot of homeowner research, and we thought, well, this would be a great question to ask. Like, what are your expectations? What do you want from your builders and your remodelers these days? So we did some research and we surveyed 900 homeowners. Half of them had completed a building or renovation project in the last 2 years. A quarter were in the middle of one, and a quarter were planning. And we asked them, what is the one thing that would have most improved your experience, right? What's the one thing that could have been done differently that would have made it a much better experience for you? Number one was communication. So, this research was particularly interesting because we sort of synthesized overall what were the categories, but we also asked for verbatims, like what were the specific pain points around communication. But number one was communication. Number two was visualization. And number three was financial transparency. So maybe talk a little bit about, what do you hear from your clients in terms of how they're addressing this and why technology has become important, along these particular lines and these pain points.
So I think when you look at it, these three, you can look at it as these are tried and true, I think, frustrations on the part of homeowners. When you really look at what the challenges are with remodeling projects, turning the clock back all the way back to 30, 40 years ago, 9 problems out of 10 in home remodeling are a product of miscommunication. They're not because of incompetence. They're not because of dishonesty. They're because of miscommunication. I think the visualization, if you really think about it, who is your biggest competitor in home remodeling? It oftentimes is not other remodelers, it's the client themselves. And when I say that, it's they can't visualize things. They're fearful of what they've decided, and they're spending huge amounts of money just hoping that they're going to be happy with it. And then lastly, I think the financial transparency, I think, is also the case because, again, many of the complaints, I'm on the Better Business Bureau board. Most of our complaints with the Better Business Bureau are from homeowners doing home remodeling and home improvement. And in many cases, they just don't necessarily trust the remodelers. So as a result of that, they really need to understand the financials and the trust. So every one of these things can be addressed with technology. And we'll unpack that a little bit more. But I think this is not a new concept, that communication and visualization and certainly transparency are all of a sudden something that's given birth because of technology. They've been there deep rooted in terms of the client themselves and what they're yearning for the last 20, 30, and even 40 years.
And one of the things that we're seeing is that, sort of next generation of remodeling, homeowners has these expectations, right? It was one thing, older generations, and they're still out there and they're still investing. But as the new generations are coming up, they have much higher expectations on being, they're tech natives. They're used to using their phones for everything and online banking and having information at their fingertips. So, it's kind of the time where construction businesses need to prepare, need to get comfortable because their whole next generation of clients that's coming up fast has these types of expectations.
Exactly. And again, I go back to 10, 20 years ago. I think some of the technologies were nice to have. And then maybe about 5, 10 years ago, okay, you needed to integrate that in for efficiencies and effectiveness. But today, it's not nice to have, it's necessary to have. Because in many ways, it's kind of gotten to the point where, it's almost like you need to wear shoes when you go outside. So you need to have technology integrated with your business because that's what is expected on the part of the homeowners. Otherwise, their perception of you is not necessarily a positive one.
Makes sense. So let's walk through a few examples of the application, and then we can talk a little bit about kind of the sales process and what you're seeing with the folks you're advising these days. So actually, I will add one of the verbatims we got back was, gee, I wish my contractor was more tech savvy. So as kind of a point of reinforcement here, this is the type of thing people actually typed into their survey results of just kind of, hey, get on board. It'd be great if you could just embrace some of these tools and make it easier for me. So one of the examples that I love to show is, having a client dashboard, having a simple place where you have one source of truth for all your communication has really been a game changer for not just clients, and again, addressing their communication point. Communication point. I want more communication. I want to see what's happening. Having one source of truth where all your emails, all your texts come into one central place where you, your team, and your clients can see it prevents a lot of miscommunication and misunderstandings, right? You can always go back and say, here's what we agreed on, not I kind of remembered this phone call, but actually here's where the communication was documented. And it does a lot to protect your business as well as set a good expectations with your clients.
Yeah, I think one of the themes that I'm oftentimes thinking about, it's our obligation to communicate, not their responsibility to understand. And the power of that simple theme is who owns the communication? You own the communication, so therefore you've got to have a vehicle that you can take ownership that's very, very effective. And certainly the technology, I think, allows you to own it more effectively.
Makes a lot of sense. So in addition to communication, we talked about financial clarity. So being able to publish your estimate, right, online where folks can see the key line items they need to see a payment schedule. So one of the things that we found is, yes, you're doing progress payments, but if you put in a payment schedule with rough dates so that homeowners have some expectation of when approximately you're going to be asking for payments, really helps when that invoice comes for there not to be a surprise factor, for them to have more comfort with where are we with the budget, where are we progressing. And interestingly enough, one of the surprising verbatims we got were no more paper checks, please take credit cards. And so, we've sort of built into the system the ability to do that with very minimal fees on the bank transfer side, and the money gets to you faster. I think it's like $30, no matter how much they spend. And for credit cards, you can actually pass along a convenience fee, so that if your client really wants those credit card points, you can say no problem, and add a line item to their invoice for a convenience fee. But it was surprisingly how many folks were like, please stop with the paper checks. We want to be able to pay online and work online.
Yeah, many of you have heard of a little company that also does a lot of consumer research called Google. And they looked at the preferences with homeowners in terms of what was important to them. And they highlighted 3 things. One is they wanted it to be easy. They didn't need complicated. 2 is they wanted transparency. And lastly, they wanted technology and have it to be more of a digital experience. You got to listen to what the clients are wanting here. And then it's our job, I think, to respond to that, and control the process in the most effective way. I think a tool like this really allows you to do that.
Yeah, and one nice thing is your client doesn't have to download anything. They don't have to install anything. You just give them a link and they have access to everything. And that really helps, because we get a lot of questions. People are like, what about older generations? Are they going to be comfortable with this? And you can do it in degrees, right? You can publish what you think they want to see, and you can do it in just like a quick email link rather than asking them to do or download something complicated, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. Managing expectations. So we hear this as a big challenge. So one of the things we heard most on the communication front was better communication around scheduling. I want to know when things are going to change. I want to know when people are going to be in my house. I want to know, what the impact of a change on the schedule is. How can you provide me more visibility? So being able to have a scheduling tool, again, that's easily published to the client, to your team members, to your subs, et cetera, with all the dependencies, is one great way to let clients self-serve. So, it can often be very difficult to deal with all the emails and write questions. And you obviously want to have relationship building, meaningful conversations. But if your client has a question in the middle of the night or starts to worry about something, it can be very reassuring to let them see, hey, this is where we are. This is the status. Here's what's coming next. And work with them that way.
Yeah, and I on this, I like not only the managing expectations, but I think from a success point of view, it's how can you exceed the expectation? And I think when you create an experience that is not what they expect, but it's better, then that's where you can control the process, and that's where the trust is built. This is a game that we're playing here that you've got to have some pretty deep relationships with them. And I think if you're focused not on just managing the expectation, but also exceeding it, I think you're going to see a lot more success.
Great point. And on the exceeding expectations front, when the category we had around visualizations, right? What people's comments are, hey, I want a design tool that will show me what my project's going to look like at the end, or how can you make me more comfortable with what I'm going to get for my investment. And we heard a ton of people just writing, I need better visualizations. I want to see it in 3D. I don't want a hand-drawn thing. I want to see what it's going to be what it's going to look like. And we've seen a lot of folks have success, but the challenge for you is not everybody is a chief architect expert, and right, they don't have the design skills, or they don't have the time, or want to invest money in something heavy. So one of the things that we've seen a lot of success with is a really simple tool that builds 2D plans, 3D plans, and now augmented reality walkthroughs where you can use it to close the deal. So you've got a client who's a little uncomfortable, pulling the trigger you don't want to go build a very complicated construction plan to convince them to do this, but now you have a fast and easy way that almost any team member can learn to use to do that, or sell them on your ideas, or convince them why they should add a window or move a wall, right, or put the island here. It's a much easier way to communicate, and it makes them a lot more comfortable.
Absolutely. And, forever, I think most of them have been thinking about the sale of remodeling projects very much being about a project. Your clients are calling you because they want something done, not because they're lonely, not because they needed a new friend. However, the success in sales happens more with creating the relationship, selling the process. And I think what's interesting in terms of how technologies have weaved into this, we've kind of gone away from that, portfolio, that kind of photograph book and all that. And the client's not just judging you on what you're presenting, they're judging you on how you're presenting it. When you're showing the technologies and what you're presenting, they're seeing what that experience is. They're reducing their anxiety and fear, and their comfort of working with you in the relationship has a lot to do today. Not keeping a secret that you're using different kind of technologies in your business, but you're actually sharing those with the client. Their fears are vaporizing, and their likelihood of proceeding is much greater.
It's a great point and a good segue to, how do you use tech in your sales process, and what are you seeing clients do? Because it's no longer just a behind the scenes, all right, I've signed a new client or a new project, and now I'm going to, introduce them to this technology. You're kind of seeing that being brought forward in the process these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anyone using a selling process, there's a step in the selling process that's telling your story. And when you're telling your story in the past, it was very much about your process, it was about your history, and it was about, your projects and your certainly portfolio. However, today, you're also taking them through what that experience is going to be like. And I am working with several different companies that are integrating the technologies into the experience. The fact that the client can be anywhere in the world and be able to know what's happening because of technology. The fact that they can see the scheduling of the project, it's creating a lot more comfort. Those that are fearful in terms of being able to visualize what a floor plan is, very quickly they can see a 3D perspective on things. And it's showing them those technologies that they're going to get in working with you that creates the likelihood that they're going to want to proceed with you.
Yep. In some cases, it's a differentiator. In many cases, it's, we hear this for bigger and luxury projects. It's a must-have, right? This is a standard part of the sales process now for certainly high-end projects.
Exactly. And I think you hit on a key thing. It wasn't that long ago that this was a nice to have. And right, wrong, or indifferent, it's a must-have now. If you go in and you're not integrating some of these fundamental technologies into your business, then the client's going to say, are you kind of behind the times here? Who am I working with here? And I think by not keeping it a secret and having those technologies be on the forefront, I think you're actually increasing the client comfort and wanting to work with you.
Right. The definition of professionalism has changed in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely.
It's become a lot more digital.
And what's interesting about this, one more comment on it, but
Please.
It's very easy. It's very easy for even an entry business to be able to do this. So those businesses that have hung their hat on, I've been around for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, well, I can grab a hold of a few technologies and literally in a year of business, I can be more beautiful and oftentimes more current than you can having been around for 20 years.
Yeah, it raises an interesting question, right, of what it's going to be to stay competitive. Everybody's busy now, but we know things go cyclically. And there's definitely going to be some winners and losers, I think, based on the experience that they can provide. I think, for us to wrap, my main takeaway and what I hear most is that, like, the only way it's motivating, I think, for contractors to want to do this is it's got to be a win-win, right? Yes, you want to create a better experience for your clients, but what's in it for you? And I think, there's a lot of three different ways that we tie this in. On the communication front, it's really a risk mitigator. If you are, providing communication in a tech platform and you have that one source of truth, then you're avoiding risk because you know how everything documented. You don't have the issues where you had a conversation and you wanted to make the client happy, and so now they're expecting something and not expecting to be billed for it, right? These things can be made much clearer. You can have that emotional, reassuring conversation, but then you send them a digital change order or you document your conversation online, and there's a lot that you can do to make it a safer operation for your own company.
Absolutely. I think that again, I'm a big believer in kind of the balance between high tech and high touch. And I think what we're talking about here is not abandoning the experience of a high touch, but integrating the high tech to even take the high touch to a new level.
And make it easier, right? So it's not so much work to do the high touch because there's some self-service aspects and clients feel like they're being well served. The second area for visual tools, again, I think that idea of winning better business, even though people are better now, like being able to do that is going to help you win more of the projects you really want, the more profitable, the larger, the upscale, the better area. It gives clients, that confidence to pull the trigger and hopefully is going to result in a better bottom line.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is remodelers and home improvement folks, they create beautiful things. But are you telling your story in a beautiful way too? And I think that what I think is so important with these tools is it really helps you to tell the story in the same way that your projects are beautiful as well.
Makes a lot of sense. And finally, as we talked about on the financial clarity side, again, this is another risk mitigator. Not only are you providing better financial clarity for your clients by sending them online estimates, having them digitally sign estimates, change orders, invoices, etc., and make it more convenient for them. But it means the money's going to hit your bank account faster, and you don't have any miscommunications on what you agreed to do and what you agreed the charge was going to be for any changes. And so again, it really comes down to a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I think the more that you make the sale a non-event and remove every obstacle for them to be able to proceed, and certainly by addressing, I think, this the financial element with technology, it helps to just make it a non-event, and therefore the likelihood that you can see more effectiveness is much greater.
Yeah, I was really surprised about how many people were uncomfortable having a direct financial conversation with their builder or remodeler, right? It's uncomfortable. People don't like talking about money, and so having something where they can take the time, go through the details, feel like they have that transparency on changes. It helps a lot because we had a lot of people say, my contractor's really nice, but I'm not comfortable having this conversation, or I'm not comfortable asking about X, Y, or Z. And so you have to be kind of the adult in the relationship. And this kind of gives you the tools to do that, to have fewer, I think, awkward conversations, because everybody's had an awkward financial conversation with a client more than once. That this is a way that, gives them sort of the space to digest, absorb the information and build trust, because it's kind of all published there and they don't feel like, there's going to be a surprise.
Absolutely. Yesterday when we were talking, Liza, we had one of the folks ask, how do you handle kind of the, I want a breakdown on the project? And, she obviously, I could just tell from her body language, was never looking forward to that question, was fearful of that question. And I think if you start to change that and you stop being defensive about it, you start having a little bit more transparency built into your process, and you're really comfortable with having those discussions, and I think technology allows you to do that, I think you're going to certainly have a better experience.
And it makes sense, because I think your advice was, well, what is the breakdown that they want to see? And with technology, you can put together estimates and proposals that have categories that are the areas you want clients want to see. Oh, well, here's labor, here's materials, right?
Exactly.
Or here are sort of general room guidelines. And so it gives you the ability to, give them that
control
comfort.
the process.
Exactly. 100%. 100%. All right, I think we covered it all. So
excellent.
Thank you so much for sharing your
Thank you,
wisdom
Liza.
today. And great to share this with a broader group very soon.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.